All right, Lyon Con. This is amazing, you guys. Look at everyone here gaming and hanging out and dressed up and enthusiastic energy in the room. This is really fantastic. Thank you so much for coming out to Lyon Con 2018, the very first ever Lyon Con. I'm Jimmy Mack from the podcast Rebel Force Radio, where we talk about Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. And we've been doing it. Yeah, how about it for Star Wars? We must have a lot of Star Wars fans here. Everyone, it seems, has a personal connection to Star Wars, regardless of where you're from or how old you are. It seems like everyone just has that personal connection with Star Wars. I know a lot of gamers over there. Star Wars RPG is really super popular, and all kind of gaming. Now, what we're here to talk about at Lyon Con is growing up with Star Wars. Now, typically on Rebel Force Radio, I have a co-host, a guy named Jason Swank, who lives in Cleveland, Ohio. Jason couldn't be here today, so I decided to bring along someone who's a personal friend of mine, someone who I've known a pretty long time. As a matter of fact, ever since he was born. This is my younger brother, Bill Mack and Ernie. Billy Mack, ladies and gentlemen.
How you doing, everybody? Good to see you.
And I couldn't think of anyone else better to join me to talk about growing up with Star Wars than this guy sitting to my left, because that was something very important to us as we grew up in the 70s. I was 8 years old when Star Wars came out in 1977. Still waiting on my AARP card, but I know that's just right around the corner. And Star Wars has been something that's been a constant in my life for more than 4 decades now. And it had an impact on us as kids. Bill, you were how old? 4 years old in 77?
No, I was 5 when it came out.
Ooh, the ripe old age of 5. Yeah. So obviously a veteran of film franchises galore. Hey, let's think about it for a second. What did we get into as kids who were consuming pop culture in the early to mid-70s before Star Wars? What was the big deal for kids of that era?
Good Times?
Good Times,
No.
the television show?
Well, there were Good Times, and then there was Good Times, the TV show, yeah.
Dynamite?
No, we were into $6 Million Man, I remember. Micronauts, I think. Jaws was big in the culture at that time. Gosh, maybe 2001 Planet of the Apes for sure.
Planet of the Apes, yes, for sure. And as boys, we enjoyed the G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe was big.
But that's...
I mean, literally, he was big. He was 12 inches tall back then.
But when Star Wars came around in 1977, we kind of put all that stuff in the toy box and forgot about it, didn't we?
Pretty much.
Star Wars just consumed everything. And it was a movie that when it came out, the impact, and I know a lot of kids are here because we are at LT, and you've grown up with Star Wars, but before Star Wars hit, there was really nothing like it. So when it was released in 1977, it had a huge cultural impact because, quite honestly, as kids of that era, we never saw anything like it, not even close. Do you remember the first time you saw Star Wars?
It's I was so little that it's very fuzzy, but I remember the first few times we went. I mean, we were obsessed enough to where we were asking Mom and Dad to take us pretty much every weekend. And the first few times we saw it, we were extremely late to the movie. The first memory I have of seeing it was at Mount Prospect Theater. Do you remember the Mount Prospect Theater?
I do.
It used to be next to a bowling alley. And we arrived at the part where 3PO was hailing down the sand crawler. That's the earliest memory I have of it. Whether or not that was my first time seeing it, I kind of doubt it. Although we were late about 2 or 3 times to the movie, that I remember that when we finally got there on time and got to see the opening scenes on Princess Leia's ship, that was a revelation because I thought it was like, it was kind of a holy grail at that point to actually see the footage of the
Our
first
parents
20
were
minutes.
late all the time when they were taking us to the movie theater. So sometimes we'd stick around and wait for the next screening to begin and then watch the beginning of the movie. People used to do that, I guess.
Oh, yeah, totally. Just wait around and watch it 2-3 times in a row. That was the best.
But
and of course, theaters were so much bigger then that it was pretty easy to do, because you could easily hide and duck away, duck out, or sit in the front of the theater, and you'd never even be spotted.
So when Star Wars hit, all the kids would go to see it all the time. The only way we could see it, because there was no home video at that time, we would have to go to the movie theater. So it would stay in the theaters for years at a time, it seemed like. And then it would leave the theaters and then come back out again. So it seemed like every summer was a Star Wars summer as we go back.
You know what's funny? I remember looking in the, now it's like every weekend they post up the box office grosses and stuff like that on Rotten Tomatoes or whatnot. But I remember looking in the newspaper back then, like when Empire Strikes Back came out, and it was so popular and it was playing so long that the theater that was running it in the newspaper would run an ad that would say, 12th smash week, 13th smash week, and I was kind of keeping track of how long it was there. 12 weeks, that's 3 months in the theater, and it's still, doing pretty good business. Totally different time, when you think about it. And like I said, big theaters. So, for a movie to have that kind of staying power is really saying something. It's kind of hard to imagine the type of phenomenon that was nowadays, when things are, in the theater for a relatively short time, 2-3 weeks in some cases, and then you're watching it at home, on your TV within a month. Pretty much, that's about the window these days. So
there was the only home video that existed back then was waiting for movies to be replayed on television.
On TV, and that always took a couple of years.
It took a long time,
and then it was edited.
Yeah, right. There were in commercials.
If you were lucky to have a VCR, then you could watch it again. But if not, that was it. Was the commercial broadcast.
So that's what kept driving us back to go see this movie over and over and over again, and why it became such a cultural phenomenon, because it was always an event when we got the chance to go to the theater. Then, of course, the merchandising that was tied in with Star Wars. You couldn't open a loaf of bread without a Star Wars trading card falling out of it. You couldn't go to a magazine stand without seeing it lined with Star Wars on the front cover.
Wait, Wonder Bread was your first exposure to Star Wars, wasn't it?
This is true. This is true. Even if you want to go back further, before the film was even released, summer of '77, I was a little late to the party. I only saw one movie that summer, and it was Peter Benchley's The Deep. Yeah. Everyone remembers that, right? Right? No. All my friends were going to see Star Wars, and I didn't really feel the urge to go see it until one day I was in my mom's kitchen. She was making me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and out of the loaf of Wonder Bread fell a trading card. And on the trading card was a Tusken Raider, Sand People. And I saw that thing, and I looked at it, and I was just entranced by the sheer ugliness of it. Let's face it, they're not pretty, no. But I said, I have to see more of this thing. I have to go to the theater and actually see this guy and find out what he's all about. So then I finally convinced my dad to take us. And but merchandising was everywhere. As a matter of fact, this is the first piece of Star Wars merchandise that was ever put on sale. This is a replica, actually.
Bought here at the show.
I bought it I bought it right over here just a few minutes ago. But this is artwork by a Marvel Comics artist named Howard Chaykin. And Howard is the guy who was hired by Marvel Comics and Lucasfilm to do the very first comics adaptation of Star Wars. This poster was sold at early comic conventions, probably smaller than this one. Really, it's the very earliest comic conventions. These guys would go out and promote Star Wars before it even hit the theaters. This poster is a replica of that poster they sold at those conventions for 50 cents or $1. Nowadays, if you can find this actual original poster, you'll be paying several $100s for it. It's very rare now. But this is a replica of the very first piece of Star Wars merchandise that was available publicly. And like I said, sold at Comic-Cons, like I believe Kansas City Comic-Con was among the first places where this piece of artwork was actually.
That guy once, didn't you?
I did
Howard
speak.
Chaykin?
I did speak to the actual artist who drew this, Howard Chaykin, several years ago, and he seemed really bitter that he didn't get his big piece of the Star Wars pie. He was looking for some more cashola. I think he saw it all going to George Lucas out in California, and he was saying, "Hey, where's my nickel?" But he didn't get it. So, but that I just thought this was a really interesting piece of very early Star Wars merchandise, and I just bought it right over here from these nice people here at the convention. So I shall hang this and treasure it for years to come. But but that's an early example of Star Wars merchandise. Of course, now when we go to stores, there are entire aisles filled with Star Wars merchandise. It seems like you go to your big box stores like Walmart, Target, you'll see aisles and aisles of Star Wars merchandise, clothing, trading cards, even bathroom accessories. You can go You can go to Target and find a R2-D2 wastebasket, maybe a C-3PO toilet paper dispenser, or a Jabba the Hutt toilet brush.
It is everywhere.
You can get it all. You could get in a TIE Fighter shower curtain or a Yoda bath mat. And you'll have a complete. I'm going to do this now. I've inspired myself enough to where I'm actually going to go home and dedicate an entire bathroom to Star Wars, which of course my family will enjoy, considering the fact we live in a 4-bedroom right here in LaGrange, and one of those bedrooms, the second largest, is known to the family as the Star Wars room, which is insane to think of.
The reputation of the Star Wars room precedes you, I think.
It does.
Do you remember the first, Star Wars buy, the first thing you bought, or
the very first purchase I ever made? That's a great question. It was probably a jigsaw puzzle. Or maybe some the dip dots. Do you remember that? It was like paint.
Oh yeah,
and you would
those were kind of disappointing.
Yeah,
it's funny because some of the early merchandise was disappointing. It was like they weren't quite up to speed on what would make these things interesting to kids. I remember we had the lightsaber. Now later on they came out with some pretty sturdy plastic lightsabers that you could fight with. But the first ones they came out with were like these inflatable ones. Do you remember the inflatable lightsaber? And it was basically, did you think that was cool? I just remember it being pretty flimsy. It was like a flashlight with an inflatable beam. And of course, the first thing you wanted to do with a lightsaber, as any kid would want to do, is hit something with it. And that thing, that did not hold up to the abuses of a 5-year-old.
I remember it came with an emergency repair kit, and I think it was just like a piece of tape.
Well, that was Kenner. Kenner cared. They definitely cared.
But and then of course the lightsabers became plastic, and then
those hard plastic.
They would light up.
Cool.
And you'd see them everywhere because there were knockoffs. Laser sword. Yeah. You'd go to Walgreens and buy a $5 lightsaber that would split in half within about 30 seconds of playing with it. But we all had them, and that's just what growing up in the 70s was all about. I think a lot of kids still love to play with the lightsabers, though.
Of course.
And they're so cool now where they actually come out of the hilt and they ignite, and they look like the actual prop from the films. Boy, kids these days, let me tell you.
I know.
My original lightsaber was carved out of wood, and I got splinters on my hand from it. That's the kids these days have it so easy. But, it was just something that was very prevalent. I think the first thing I actually did purchase was a Marvel Star Wars comic.
Oh, yeah, the big one. It was about a size of this poster.
Yeah, and it was, like I said, done by the same artist who drew this poster art, Howard Chaykin. He was the main artist for the original Marvel Comics Star Wars line.
That's still around, isn't it? Do you still have that, without the cover, if I'm not mistaken?
Possibly, yes. I do have a full room of Star Wars memorabilia, so I'm sure it's buried in there somewhere. I also have a full attic of Star Wars memorabilia, too. A lot of empty boxes, because as a collector, you... for some reason, you want to hold on to the box. So in case you actually do sell it, it'll be mint in box.
We actually held on to our boxes for our toys for a long time.
Yes.
Do you remember that? What was the rationale for that?
So you're talking about the original era in the 70s.
Yeah.
We did save them, but most kids would throw the packaging away. So if you go to conventions like this and you see vintage Star Wars items for sale, you're paying a premium for them, several $100s sometimes, just because they're still in the original box.
Yeah.
And as I said, most people thought of that as garbage and threw it away. So it's highly collectible nowadays. And somehow we were able to salvage those boxes ourselves, because maybe as kids we recognized the collectability of it, or we liked the pictures on it, or whatever. But I believe they were a victim to a sump pump malfunction at one point. They were in the basement and they got swept away with the sewage and all of our hard work.
Yeah. Well, I think that's we were keeping them near the sub pump in the room there for quite a while, and that's
big mistake. Yes.
Yeah. Time took its toll. That was not the best storage area for those boxes.
Big mistake.
But I'm trying to remember like why, because they would have been worth a lot of money if they survived. I mean, I guess that's why they survived, why they're worth so much money.
Money is because
cardboard does not survive. Who would have thought? Cardboard does not last.
So learning from the past and thinking that stuff I buy today might actually be worth something if I kept it in the original box. I have an attic full of empty Star Wars boxes. And I had my roof replaced because living here in LaGrange, I'm sure like a lot of people who live in LaGrange, you guys have an old house. Our house was built in 1880. And so every once in a while we have to get a new roof put on that thing. And we had some guys over to install a new roof, and they informed me that I had an attic filled with empty boxes. And what was up with that? And I was like, oh, well, it's for
so
the
perceptive.
It's for the collectibles. Yeah.
Hey, did you know? Well, they didn't think you knew that, huh?
I think I look at it as investment in the collectibles, and they look at it as a fire hazard. So yeah.
I'm a little surprised though, because you're not one of these collectors that keeps everything mint though. You take them out and goof around with them.
Yeah, well, having a Star Wars room in the house. I have 2 sons. One's 18 and he's a proud graduate of LT. He graduated last year, and my youngest son currently attends LT. And when they were really little, we would let them in the Star Wars room. And, of course, they would see all of these figurines and toys and stuff on the shelves, and they'd want to play with it. And, I'm not some cruel-hearted guy. If a kid is looking at a toy and indicates he wants to play with the toy, I don't care what it's worth. The kid's playing with the toy. So I had a system, though. It was like a library system where they could check out things. And there was a limit. It was like you can't check out more than 3 things at a time. If you want to check out something else, you have to return what you already checked. And they went along with it, which was cool, because they would have their little friends over, and they would want to give the tour of the collection. And when I say it's a Star Wars room, it's literally a Star Wars room. There's nothing in there that's not Star Wars outside of the television, which is often playing a Star Wars film. You got it.
I didn't know about this checkout system. So what? Well, I'm picturing you with the glasses on.
Yeah.
The library and the rubber stamp, and did you have cards for everything, or
no?
How did that system hold up?
We didn't have to have cards, but there was a system in place, and so they would have their little friends over.
Card catalog.
And they would.
I would like two Ugnaughts, please, for the weekend.
They would expect their friends to want to grab stuff off the shelf too, so they would stand there and watch their friends. Like, hey, don't touch that. So I was like, oh, I did a good job. I raised them well. I was
always fascinated how Michael, in particular, would make up names for the characters when he was real little. I remember the Ugnaughts were the nutballs.
Yeah, the nutballs.
Yeah, that's. Trying to think of some other ones he had. Yeah.
I think Jabba the Hutt was known as Gunny, and C-3PO was Ketchawan. Don't ask. But I remember when you were a little kid, you used to call Batman Mott D.
I thought that was you.
No, that was you. That was you. That wasn't me.
Mott D
This guy.
and Evil Knievel was Eno Nino.
There you go.
Oh, now here, there's something else that we were into. Evil Knievel.
Evil Knievel was big in the 70s.
There was a great role model for us. Evil Knievel. This guy. This guy made I don't even think what he was making a living on at that time. I mean, at one time he was known for doing stunts, but I think by then he was pretty much, it was his reputation that
No, he was still doing stunt work in the 70s.
Well,
yes, he was.
I thought like the Caesar's Palace crack up was the last thing he did. And then, he had the Snake River, but that was just
See what we were fans of before Star Wars and how desperately we needed something else instead of watching suicidal stuntmen. I mean, as kids, of course, you'd want to emulate your heroes. So there'd be kids outside with their bikes, riding it off of garage roofs and stuff. It was mass hysteria. We needed a saga that we could sink our teeth into that wouldn't kill us.
That's right.
So
Evil Knievel. That's how desperate we were.
Yeah, Evil Knievel went to the back of the closet. Star Wars came out to the front of the closet. And as kids, that's where we had the closet doors that you would open up, and so it would slide open.
Right.
So it would be wide open to the room, and we would go in there and have all the Star Wars play sets set up on the floor and stuff. There were no clothes in the closet, just Star Wars stuff.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Again, a precursor to the Star Wars room, where there's no bed, there's no furniture. There's no furniture in the room. I think there's a single chair. Yeah. My son said, hey, listen, if you want to commit, you got to get the sofa out of here. It's just taking up space. But
is it going that way? It used to be. There used to be a total like hang area in there. Like TV, sofa, chair, coffee table.
No, it's all
gone. It is slowly just taking over everything.
Yeah. Some friends of mine, collectors like me, guys who are in middle age and doing anything we can to hold on to our youth, which is fading off into the distance so fast. So painfully fast.
It's gone.
But, I mean, Star Wars is something of a fountain of youth. I find connecting with it does kind of put me in the mindset of that 8-year-old kid or that 12-year-old kid or whatever, where it helps me relieve me of some of the burdens and stresses of being an adult in the year 2018. And I think that's kind of an appeal, something that keeps guys my age coming back to Star Wars all the time, is because we're always sort of chasing that youthful buzz we got off of it when we actually were youth.
Totally.
Youthful.
No, the collecting can. I mean, let's be honest. The collecting could really get out of hand sometimes.
Yes.
But otherwise, very healthy outlet. We came from a family of well, I was going to say a family of collectors, but it was really my dad who had the most influence on that. He was a big baseball card collector, memorabilia. And I think it served the same function for him in a lot of ways. It was a way for him to go back. Because the collecting is really just, there was the experience we had when we were a kid, and the collecting of the objects or whatever, of that time period is a way of reliving that experience. It's really about that experience. And, and those things are good to preserve. I think those are very nurturing. And definitely, something that's a lot of fun to share with other people. So that, is Jim, as long as you keep it contained to that room, that's never gonna happen.
Well,
forget it.
I'm worried about it spilling out. But my dad has a basement that is filled with his collection, and it's a lot of sports memorabilia. It's movie memorabilia. He's a big John Wayne fan. He loves the old westerns and things of that nature. Big Bob Hope fan. And so I think that's where we got the collecting gene from, is our dad. And I've been able to take it up a notch because I have an extra bedroom in my house, which my family has so graciously allowed me to take. And but they like it. That's part of the fabric of the family almost, is knowing that room is there. And I think it makes the house kind of unique and different to the kids and people who visit. A friend of mine is a guy named Steve Sansweet, and he has the world's largest Star Wars collection, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. And when I say it's large, it's housed in a giant converted chicken barn in Northern California, in Petaluma exactly. I think it's 30,000 square feet. He has probably a million different collectibles in there, really, if you break it all down and consider every issue of a magazine or every trading card. He's probably got well over 1 million items housed there. And you can actually go there for a tour by becoming a member at ranchoobi1.org. And it's actually very affordable if you don't, count the cost of a flight to San Francisco or Oakland, which I recommend flying into Oakland. It's a smaller airport, and you don't have to drive through downtown San Francisco to go across the Golden Gate Bridge to get there. But I'll tell you what, it's definitely worth the trip for any Star Wars fan to see how much love and attention Steve has put into this collection, and he's built an entire museum based out of it. And in many ways, Star Wars collectors that I know who are connected to the community and the hobby, they emulate Steve Sansweet and try to preserve their Star Wars collections in the same way, because it's more than just having a bunch of pieces of plastic. It really is a personal connection that I think a lot of collectors have with their Star Wars stuff. And you can tell stories about it, and Steve is an expert at doing that. So if anyone's interested in learning more about Rancho Obi-Wan, go to ranchoobi1.org. But on a smaller scale... Incredible collection. On a smaller scale, you can fill up a bedroom, or you can fill up a shoebox and have a personal connection to your collection that way. And that's something that's really grown a lot, at least in the last couple of decades, when you talk about being a Star Wars fan, is collecting Star Wars stuff, and actually how it's sort of grown into an organized field in itself. And so what about you? How do you express your Star Wars fandom through collecting? Because the merchandise is such a big deal. It's such a big part of it.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think a lot of it comes down to my experience in childhood and recreating some of that or revisiting some of that through these objects. and that's what I enjoy most. I think I've reached a stage in my life with collecting that I really am constantly reminding myself of like what I want my collection to be. In other words, I think I had passed a time where I really was just buying anything that really looked cool to me, and there's so many things that I like that the collection was losing focus a little bit. So I've kind of tried to focus my attention to the things that are really meaningful to me.
So what is
most of that? I would say the vintage stuff at this point, the original trilogy. That's pretty much, I think, where my interests lie. Although I was into Lego for a long time. I grew up loving Lego, not just Star Wars Lego, just Lego period. And when they started to make Star Wars Lego, of course, I was totally on board with that. But I've reached a stopping point with that because like
cost,
I said, it just
space,
cost and space. Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. So,
along with my collection of Star Wars, I've also collected quite a bit of debt too. So let's not kid ourselves. It's you don't want to overextend yourself if you're a collector. That's for sure.
But I feel like I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to perfect my original collection. I mean, I feel like at this point it's at a place of maintaining, completing certain areas of my collection, buying certain things that I had always wanted, but it is mostly from childhood. I've had to limit the vintage stuff. Yeah.
So obviously,
yeah. And it is awesome when you do find something that you like, you wanted as a kid, but were never able to get for whatever reason.
Yes.
Or
wish fulfillment.
Restoring something that you still have. I've really gotten into that, where I'm taking older toys that I have that are now missing pieces, or maybe have marks on them, or the electronics don't work. And I've really gotten into kind of going back in and learning how to bring those back up to brand new condition, you know, and I find that very gratifying. It's nice to have these things that have belonged to me my whole life and bring them back, bringing them back up to snuff. It's just a lot of that's a blast. I've been doing that probably for the last 3 years. You know,
it's interesting how just being a fan of a movie has opened you up to new hobbies, new interests, and new skills as you just merely express your fandom. And of course, we're original trilogy generation guys, but we've seen Star Wars grow and expand so much over the last few decades with the prequel trilogy from George Lucas himself throughout the late 90s and early 2000s to I think 2005.
Oh, here's a question for you.
What's that?
Which era do you like better? I mean, I know of course the original trilogy is always probably tops for us, but the sequel, the current trilogy now, or the prequel era? What do you? Which are you enjoying more?
Well, I think actually I'm enjoying what's going on nowadays with Star Wars, with J.J. Abrams bringing Star Wars back with The Force Awakens, Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, of course Rogue One from last year. I enjoyed all three of those films. I especially enjoyed The Last Jedi this time around. I really thought that film has done a lot to expand the mythology of Star Wars and ask new questions about it. There's been a lot of debate about that film online, and there's been a lot of mystery about that film provided by what we saw when it was released in December. And that's what I like. I like being challenged as a Star Wars fan, and as long as this franchise can continue to do that, I will be I'll feel pretty fulfilled, because what I like about this current era, the sequel era, or the Disney era, whatever you want to call it, because of course Disney bought Lucasfilm from George Lucas back in 2012, and they have plans to continue to produce Star Wars films for the foreseeable future. I think when the prequel era rolled around, it felt like George Lucas's victory lap in many ways. It felt like he was fulfilling a promise he made not only to himself but to the fan base, and it almost felt like it was something he had to do. And it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when the last film came out in 2005, you really felt like that was it. And so it was a little bittersweet, actually.
Yeah.
Nowadays, with an open-ended future for Star Wars and all the different possibilities, and the idea that more than just one guy is creating it. Because, of course, I mean, Star Wars has always been a team effort, but during the George Lucas era, he ran it pretty tightly. It was he was writing the stories. He wasn't really working in a collaborative way with other people. It was almost
singular vision.
He was directing. He was calling all the shots, and that was great. I think the fan base has tremendous faith in what George Lucas was creating. He's a great world builder. He has a visual imagination of in a profound way, and he's someone who can build a mythology. He has built a solid mythology. Having him expand the stories in the franchise the way he did in the late 90s and early 2000s was great, because it was coming from the guy who actually created it all himself. And so that gave it such legitimacy, I think. However, it's no secret that those films were met with mixed reaction. There was people harshly critical of it. George had a young son at the time he was producing those films, and so he maybe had created some of the content that filled the prequels, maybe had it be a little childish at times, kind of played to a kiddie audience. And I think that earned some criticism. A character like Jar Jar Binks, obviously, was a character made to appeal to a younger audience. And that's what Lucas always tried to do, was create something for a younger audience. Not looking at test group results or listening to consultants having him say, kids these days want X, Y, and Z. He was saying kids these days need X, Y, and Z. And that's what made everything he touched so important, and that's what made the prequel era so important. However, with the new era happening now, with Disney owning Star Wars and some top filmmakers beyond George Lucas are involved in Star Wars, I think that it paints for a very bright future and a very optimistic future for me as a fan, saying, you know what, this is something I could really sink my teeth into right now, because it's going to be around for a long time, and it's going to continue to expand and bring in new generations of fans. And that's what's been also a lot of fun for me to observe, is guys like us who grew up in the 70s and 80s bringing up our kids as Star Wars fans. I think that's amazing. And to see the reaction being so positive, and to see a reaction being so insatiable as far as people act, how they want Star Wars so desperately. I mean, my God, we just had The Last Jedi hit theaters in December. It's still playing at the LaGrange Theater. You can still get a tub of popcorn and sit down for 2.5 hours and watch that thing. And but if you look online, people are yelling and screaming, where's the trailer for the next film? We want to see it now. It better show up during the Super Bowl.
No patience anymore.
So, and of course,
immediate gratification. Darn it, that's what we've
it's
got.
like we can't get enough. Back in the old days, we used to have to wait 3 years between films. Then after Lucas wrapped up the original trilogy in 1983, he took 16 years until he released the next Star Wars film. So, again, in my day, we had to wait for Star Wars.
Well, you know what's fun though that happens now that kind of reminds me of the original trilogy days, is that we had this huge stretch in between movies, 3 years. I mean, that is a long time, especially when you're a kid. But in between, there was all this wild speculation going on in these conversations we were having about friends. Who is Boba Fett? What is this? What is the Clone Wars? Who? Blah blah blah. Is Obi-Wan Kenobi a clone? I remember people saying that stuff. The new movies, even though they're coming out quicker, there's something about them different from the prequel era. There's something about these new ones that is a little more provocative. That has people talking and speculating more, and that's a lot of fun. That definitely does take me back to the original trilogy days.
But it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yes.
Because the speculation gets so ramped up, and I think people convince themselves that these certain dominoes should fall in a way that when a Star Wars film like The Last Jedi comes out and does things to shock, surprise, or turn left when you think it's going to turn right.
Right, and the double-edged sword too is
that people's expectation,
and social media adds an extra element to that where people are getting immediate reactions. I mean, they're all it's so immediate, and then it's like these tides are created. They're hashtags. It becomes a trend. Something trends on social media, and it's like everybody has to go this way. That part of it I could do without, but I do like the part that at least people are talking and that people have differences of opinion. Obviously, the way they're expressed today is a lot different. I wish people could be a little more open-minded towards each other and a little more tolerant of each other. Yeah. But so that's certainly different. But
and you see this in all sort of different fan bases.
Everything. I mean, that's just the way it is. That's our
sports
world
fandom
now. So
music fandom and movie fandom. But it just seems like film fandom, when people want to criticize films, boy oh boy, is that a loud voice.
Yeah.
So of course, Star Wars.
We had Siskel and Ebert. That was what we, that was where our opinions, were coming from. Siskel and Ebert. Letters people were writing, magazines like Starlog, I mean, it just there, and our friends, and that was it. And we weren't, between our friends, we weren't going to say anything nasty to each other. That's that's the hard part about social media, is that it gives people something to hide behind, and sometimes they need to check their attitudes a little bit, you know.
But I mean, I like it that everyone has a voice, and I think it is very healthy to speculate between
Yes.
the films. And
For sure.
The things that people were speculating the most after seeing The Force Awakens were, who are Rey's parents? Are they someone important? Who is Snoke? How did he come to inherit what essentially was the Empire and all their technology? And what's the third one?
Well,
What was the third one?
How about Kylo Ren? Whether or not he could be turned.
Okay.
There was a lot of talk about whether
A
or
lot
not
of talk about that.
Han Solo let him kill him for some higher purpose. I remember that.
So this is the type of things fans talk about. And when The Last Jedi came out, we learned nothing about Snoke and saw him get killed with presumably all of his secrets. Rey's parents turned out to be nobody, despite all the speculation that went on for the last 2 years. And, of course, Kylo Ren kept on being crazy Kylo Ren the whole time. He showed no signs of redemption.
No.
So
What about Luke?
Oh, and of course, Luke Skywalker. What was he doing on the planet Ahch-To by himself? Why was he isolated? I think people were presuming something different about his character as well. And so when the film is released and people's expectations don't get mixed, instead of analyzing the film for what it is, they get mad it's not the film they wanted it to be. And I think that's understandable to a certain degree. But outright condemning a film because it's not what you thought it was in your head before it was released maybe isn't the healthiest thing, especially when you're talking the middle part of a trilogy. So I'm in it for the long haul. I'm more than willing to roll with the punches. Anything that Star Wars wants to throw at me, I can deal with it. Heck, I'm still kind of grossed out that Leia and Luke were kissing each other in the first one, and then it was revealed they were brother and sister in the third one. I don't know. How do I come to terms with that? Well, I guess I have, since it's all these years later and we're still enjoying Star Wars and talking about it. But so looking forward, the next film is, of course, Solo, a Star Wars story, which is going to be the story of Han Solo, his origin story. Presumably, we'll learn how he won the Millennium Falcon from Lando Calrissian. We'll see some background. Lando Calrissian being played by Childish Gambino, Donald Glover, and Han Solo being played by Alden Ehrenreich, who's a very talented actor from the movie Hello, Caesar.
Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar.
Hello, Caesar. Hail Caesar, which I've not seen. So I don't know what kind of interpretation Alden's going to provide for Han Solo. But here's one thing I do know about Han Solo, is that he's an interesting character, but perhaps a little one-dimensional. He shows a lot of foolhardy courage. He is definitely someone who has a lot of self-confidence and skills, but he's a reckless guy, and it seems like he's just always on the run from trouble. I think Harrison Ford gave that character a lot of his gravitas. A lot of what we like about Han Solo was due to Harrison Ford. So part of me considering another actor taking that role has me a little terrified. But the same can be said for Indiana Jones, another Harrison Ford character who, like Han Solo, would often be on the run from trouble, have some occasionally foolhardy courage episodes,
To me, as a kid, they were like the
same character
they were the
almost.
same person,
And we've seen.
Although Indy was smarter. Indy was definitely smarter.
He was a professor.
He's a professor, knew everything. That was the key difference.
But Harrison
same
Ford.
Cockiness, same machismo.
Yes.
Maybe not as humorous. Is he a little more serious? Maybe. I don't know. Very, very similar characters, though.
But
Maybe.
I think Harrison Ford brought that indelible charm to the character. And that's the reason why the character has endured and why the character is deserving of his own film. However, we don't have Harrison Ford playing the character. So remembering that Harrison played Indiana Jones, And also remembering that there have been other actors to play Indiana Jones. If you count the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles television show, where he was played by Neil Patrick Flannery and someone else. I can't remember.
River Phoenix.
And of course, River Phoenix did a great job playing young Han Solo. So it can be done. We can recast Harrison Ford characters that he owns. But I'm a little nervous about this one going into it. I have to admit. But I think they're going to surround him with all the right accoutrement. He'll have the Millennium Falcon. He'll have Chewbacca. He'll have Lando Calrissian. And hopefully he'll have the black vest.
It's funny. I think what you're probably going to see with this, I did see the actor in Hail Caesar, and he was, he kind of played a, he was an up and coming actor in the film, and he was kind of like a cowpoke type of guy who had gone to Hollywood and was going to, he had to carry the load of a very serious role, and he was just kind of a hick, really, a good-looking kid that they were trying to put into this role. If you watch some of the early Harrison Ford movies, like American Graffiti or Heroes with Henry Winkler, kind of an interesting movie, Harrison was very good at playing these good old boy, vaguely Southern type of characters.
American Graffiti.
And I could definitely, American Graffiti.
Bob Falfa.
Bob Falfa was certainly, with the cowboy hat and everything. I could definitely see Alden Ehrenreich filling those type of shoes. So for a younger Harrison, for a younger Han Solo, they might have been thinking in those terms, thinking like, not so much how is this guy going to match Harrison, but could we envision somebody who seems like a younger Harrison Ford, based on some of Harrison Ford's actual performances? It'll be interesting to see what way they go. And I could see that he might be kind of a hickish type of,
we'll see,
type of guy.
Yeah, maybe like Jethro Bodine from Beverly Hillbillies. Could you imagine?
I hope they don't make him just completely dumb either. I mean, I hope they keep some of the swagger and the things that made him a cool character.
Charisma.
I don't want to see him become the butt of jokes either.
No, of course not. Of course not. So that takes us up to 2018. The Han Solo film comes out in May, and we'll be there on opening night, just like we were for The Empire Strikes Back in 1980.
Oh, yeah.
We were standing outside
for 3 hours?
The Gulf Mill Theater, which I don't believe is standing anymore, in Niles.
No, it is.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. It's a health club, though.
It's the same building?
Yeah.
No kidding. I haven't been out there for a while. But
I mean, it's totally
I remember
converted.
standing in line.
Not the original, the Golf Mill 1 and 2, the building that we were waiting in front of. There was a second building that's gone.
Oh,
but anyway,
I see. Well, maybe we'll go back there.
Cheers to Niles. Yeah,
we'll go back there when the Han Solo film's released. But I mean, that's basically.
But they're gonna wonder what we're doing there.
Well, you can work out, Celebrating Star Wars with a good solid workout and maybe a sauna afterward.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's Star Wars for us. It's been a constant in our life for 41 years, and it shows no sign of slowing down. I've been able to pass along my love of Star Wars to my sons. They do not approach it with quite the fanaticism I do. However, they do enjoy it, and they humor Dad, I think, sometimes, and they have a lot of fun. But they don't live and breathe it and eat and sleep and drink Star Wars like I did when I was a kid. They're into the stuff kids are into, video games. My oldest son's a musician, so that's all he thinks about is music. But when those new Star Wars films open up, they'll go with Dad on opening day, and we all enjoy it. So it's something that's great to share with families, something that we were able to share as brothers growing up. I mean, every kid was into Star Wars in the 70s. There wasn't like Star Wars fans in the 70s. It was just everyone liked Star Wars. That was it. And so we're happy to see.
True phenomenon.
Absolutely. And we're happy to see that tradition continue. Here we are, well into the next millennium. Millennium Falcon. But thank you guys so much. If anyone has any questions, we'll hang out for a little while afterwards. Thank you, Lyon Con, for having us out here. If you'd like to hear us talk about Star Wars on Rebel Force Radio, we can be found at rebelforceradio.com. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Rebel Force Radio, and just about anywhere you find podcasts, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play. We're going to be on Alexa soon, so I can say, Alexa, let me hear myself. And we're out there. I think we're on iHeartRadio, if that's still around. I just read an article about iHeartRadio going down the tubes. But that's the thing that's great about podcasting. I've worked in the radio industry ever since I was a teenager myself, and I've worked at Loop radio station, WCKG 95.9 The River, here in the Chicago area. I've also worked at KLSX and KKBT in Los Angeles, and I've always wanted to do things that I really enjoy doing, and radio broadcasting has always been a huge passion of mine. Star Wars, obviously a huge passion of mine. So when podcasting came on the scene, I found it to be absolutely thrilling to be able to take my two biggest passions and mash them together and come up with Rebel Force Radio. So we're putting shows out every Friday, sometimes during the week too, it depends. But we always have a show on Friday. That's our weekly flagship show, Rebel Force Radio. Thanks to Jason Swank, who's been my partner in crime for this for the last 12 years. And of course, Billy Mac, who has been my Star Wars partner in crime ever since 1977. So, and if you want to hear more talk like this, probably in a little bit more of an organized format. The show is a little bit more locked down than this, but this was a nice, so great for LT and you guys at Lyon Con for offering us the opportunity to come out here and talk Star Wars for the better part of an hour. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lyon Con. You guys enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you.